If you're planning to immigrate to Canada or you're already here working on your permanent residence application, what I'm about to share with you today could completely change your plans. The Canadian immigration system is undergoing some of the most significant transformations we've seen in years, and if you don't understand these changes, you could end up wasting months or even years of effort, not to mention thousands of dollars. So stay with me until the end of this video because I'm going to break down everything you need to know about the 2026 immigration changes, the new rules that are already in effect, and exactly what you need to do to protect your future in Canada. Let's start with the most important change that everyone needs to understand. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada has announced a major shift in their approach to permanent residence applications. For years, Canada has been known as one of the most welcoming countries in the world for immigrants, with targets that seem to keep climbing year after year. But in late 2024 and moving into 2025, we saw something different. The government made it clear that they're putting the brakes on immigration numbers, and this isn't just talk. They've actually reduced their immigration targets significantly. Here's what this means for you. If you were counting on express entry draws happening frequently with lower scores, those days are changing. The government has indicated that they're going to be far more selective about who gets invited to apply for permanent residence. We're seeing fewer draws, higher cutoff scores, and a much stronger emphasis on specific skills and work experience that Canada needs right now. This isn't necessarily bad news if you know how to position yourself, but it does mean that the old strategies of just entering the pool and waiting might not work anymore. One of the biggest changes that's already affecting thousands of applicants is the update to the express entry system itself. The Comprehensive Ranking System, or CRS, as most of you know it, has seen some modifications in how points are awarded. The government has introduced category-based selection draws, which means they're now targeting specific occupations and skills rather than just taking the highest scoring candidates across the board. This is huge because it means that even if you have a lower overall score, you might still get selected if you work in a priority occupation. So what are these priority occupations? Based on the most recent draws and government announcements, Canada is focusing heavily on healthcare workers, skilled trades, STEM professionals, which means science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, transport workers, and agriculture and agri-food workers. If you're working in any of these fields, this is actually good news for you because you have a better chance of being selected even with a more modest CRS score. But if you're in a field that isn't considered a priority, you're going to need to work much harder to boost your score through other means, like improving your language test results, getting additional education credentials assessed, or gaining more work experience. Now let's talk about something that's causing a lot of confusion and, frankly, a lot of stress for people already in Canada. The post-graduation work permit program has undergone significant changes. If you're an international student or you're planning to study in Canada, you need to pay very close attention to this. The government has introduced new restrictions on PGWP eligibility that affect which programs qualify and how long your work permit will be valid. Starting in 2024 and carrying into 2026, there are specific field of study requirements that didn't exist before. Your program needs to align with occupations that are in demand in Canada. This means that not every college diploma or university degree will automatically lead to a work permit anymore. The government has created a list of eligible fields of study, and if your program isn't on that list, you might not be eligible for a PGWP at all. This is a massive change from the previous system where essentially any program from a designated learning institution would qualify you. There's also been a change to the length of PGWPs being issued. Previously, the rules were fairly straightforward based on the length of your study program. Now, there are additional considerations including whether your field of study is in demand and whether you studied in specific regions of Canada. Some programs might only qualify for shorter work permits than they would have in the past, which gives you less time to gain the Canadian work experience you need for permanent residence. Speaking of work permits, let's talk about the labor market impact assessment process, because this affects everyone who's trying to come to Canada on an employer-specific work permit. The government has made it significantly harder for employers to get positive LMIAs in many sectors. They've increased the requirements for employers to prove that they genuinely cannot find a Canadian citizen or permanent resident to fill the position. There are now more stringent advertising requirements, longer waiting periods, and increased scrutiny of the wages being offered. What this means for you as a potential worker is that you need to be even more strategic about which employers you work with and which job offers you pursue. An employer who isn't willing to go through the proper process or who's offering wages below the median for your occupation is likely to face an LMIA refusal, which means your work permit application will also be refused. You need to make sure that any job offer you're relying on for your immigration plans meets all the new requirements. The provincial nominee programs have also seen substantial changes that you need to be aware of. Each province has its own PNP, and many of them have updated their criteria, their streams, and their processing approaches. Some provinces have introduced new streams specifically targeting workers in rural areas or smaller communities. Others have created tech-specific pathways or have prioritized healthcare workers even more than before. If you're considering applying through a PNP, you need to research the specific province you're interested in because the rules vary dramatically from one province to another. Some provinces like Ontario and British Columbia have become more competitive with higher requirements, while others like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the Atlantic provinces are actively trying to attract more immigrants and might have more accessible pathways. The key is to match your profile with the province that's actually looking for someone with your skills and experience. There's also been a significant crackdown on immigration fraud and misrepresentation. The government has invested heavily in systems to detect fake job offers, fraudulent educational credentials, and misrepresented work experience. If you're caught providing false information or if you use a consultant who engages in fraudulent practices, the consequences are severe. You could face a 5-year ban from entering Canada, your current status could be revoked, and you could even face criminal charges in serious cases. This means you need to be absolutely certain that every piece of information you provide in your application is accurate and that all your supporting documents are genuine. If you're working with a consultant or lawyer, make sure they're properly licensed. In Canada, only regulated Canadian immigration consultants, lawyers, and notaries in Quebec are legally allowed to represent you in immigration matters. Using an unlicensed consultant, even if they seem knowledgeable, puts your entire application at risk. Let's talk about family sponsorship because there have been important updates here as well. The government has maintained the processing time targets for spouse and dependent child sponsorship, which is good news, but they've also increased scrutiny on the genuineness of relationships. If you're planning to sponsor a spouse or common law partner, you need to be prepared to provide substantial evidence that your relationship is real and ongoing. This includes things like joint financial documents, evidence of communication, photos together over an extended period, and statements from people who know you as a couple. For parent and grandparent sponsorship, the program continues to operate on an intake basis with limited spots available. The 2025 intake saw spots fill up incredibly quickly, and the same is expected for 2026. If you're hoping to sponsor your parents or grandparents, you need to be ready to submit your interest to sponsor form the moment the intake period opens. You also need to meet the income requirements, which have been adjusted upward to reflect the increased cost of living in Canada. Now, one of the most talked about changes is the increased focus on credential recognition and language proficiency. The government has realized that many immigrants were arriving in Canada with excellent qualifications, but were unable to work in their field because their credentials weren't recognized or their language skills weren't quite at the level needed for professional work. To address this, they've increased the language requirements for many programs, and they're putting more emphasis on having your credentials assessed before you even apply. For most economic immigration programs, you now need to demonstrate a much higher level of English or French proficiency than in the past. For many professional occupations, you're looking at Canadian language benchmark level 9 or higher in all abilities, which is reading, writing, speaking, and listening. This is roughly equivalent to an IELTS score of 7 or above in each section. If you're not at this level yet, you need to invest time in improving your language skills because this could be the difference between getting selected and being passed over. The express entry system has also started to award additional points for strong French language skills, even if you're applying outside of Quebec. This is part of the government's broader strategy to support Francophone communities across Canada. If you speak French or if you're willing to learn it, this could be a significant advantage for you in the selection process. Regarding refugees and humanitarian applications, while these aren't the focus for most people watching this video, it's worth noting that the government has maintained its commitment to refugee resettlement, but has become more stringent about asylum claims made at the border or from within Canada. The processing times for these applications have increased, and the approval rates have become more variable depending on the country of origin and the specific circumstances of the claim. For temporary residents who are already in Canada, there's been a significant policy shift that you absolutely need to understand. The government has made it clear that temporary residence is meant to be just that, temporary. They're cracking down on people who come to Canada on visitor visas with the undisclosed intention of staying permanently, applying for asylum, or working without authorization. Border officers have been given additional training to identify these cases, and we're seeing more refusals at the port of entry and more visitor records being issued with short validity periods. If you're in Canada on a temporary basis, whether that's as a worker, student, or visitor, you need to make sure you're complying with all the conditions of your stay. Working without authorization, studying without a study permit, or overstaying your authorized period can have serious consequences, including removal from Canada and bans on returning. If your situation changes and you need to extend your stay or change your status, you need to apply before your current status expires. The Spousal Open Work Permit program remains in place, which is good news for spouses of skilled workers and international students, but the eligibility criteria have been tightened. Your spouse's study program or work permit needs to meet certain requirements, and there are now restrictions on whose spouses qualify for open work permits. If your spouse is studying in certain programs that are shorter in duration or not in in-demand fields, you might not be eligible for an open work permit like you would have been in the past. Let's address the elephant in the room, which is the overall processing times. Despite the government's efforts to reduce backlogs, many immigration applications are still taking longer than the published processing times. Express entry applications are generally being processed within the 6-month target for complete applications, but provincial nominee programs, family sponsorship applications, and work permit applications can take considerably longer depending on the specific program and the complexity of your case. If you're planning your immigration journey, you need to build in buffer time and have backup plans. Don't quit your job, sell your house, or make irreversible life changes based on the assumption that your application will be processed by a certain date. Immigration processing can be unpredictable, and you need to be prepared for delays. So what should you do with all this information? First, assess your current situation honestly. Look at your occupation, your language skills, your education, your work experience, and determine which immigration pathway makes the most sense for you under the new rules. Second, start improving your profile now. Take language tests, get your credentials assessed, gain additional Canadian work experience if you're already here, and consider additional education or training if it will help you qualify for a priority occupation. Third, stay informed because immigration rules can change quickly. Follow official government sources, subscribe to channels like this one that break down the changes in plain language, and consider working with a licensed immigration professional if your case is complex. Fourth, be patient but proactive. Immigration to Canada is still absolutely possible, but it requires more preparation and strategy than it did in the past. Canada remains one of the best countries in the world to build a new life, raise a family, and achieve your professional goals. The changes happening in 2026 aren't meant to keep people out. They're meant to ensure that the immigrants who do come are set up for success and that they're filling genuine needs in the Canadian economy. If you're willing to put in the work to meet the new requirements, your Canadian dream is still within reach. Stay informed, stay prepared, and take action on your immigration plans today because waiting could mean missing opportunities that won't come around again.